Well, everybody, here we are in week 6 of these quarantine notes. I know that we've been sheltering in place longer than that, but so far, so good. As always, if you haven't seen why we're doing this, I encourage you to take a look. Go back at the very first video that describes all the keynotes that I've given, the trainings, the workshops, the plenaries. I'm pulling out some of the best bits of those things. And today I'm actually going to add a little bit of new stuff to it to try to really help it, kind of punch it home if I can. So I want to start by talking about something that has really been in the news for the last decade or so, and that is the concept of liberal arts education. Liberal arts education is something that for centuries, actually, people have been talking about why it's important, how it's important. People in the last 50, 60, 70 years have even started studying it to see, does it help people prepare for life? Does it help people prepare for jobs better? Is it a good context to have? And there are a lot of people who make very eloquent statements as to why it's powerful, why it's important, why it matters. If you go and just simply do a Google search for, is liberal arts education important? You will find a lot. In fact, I went back to my alma mater of the University of Northern Colorado, where I got my bachelor's degree and my master's degree. And I just looked to see what their thoughts were on it. And they were the ones who said, why you should get a degree in the humanities and social sciences. They had these great quotes from Steve Jobs talking about how it's not just about being technology. It's got to also be about the liberal arts, the humanities, and how that yields what he says, the results that make our hearts sing. Or the CEO of Aetna saying that, I know a lot of engineers who really can't communicate very effectively. So that marriage is really important. So liberal arts to a lot of people, especially in higher ed, and obviously especially at liberal arts institutions, is something that they would vie for, something they would argue is important. Yet, we also know that liberal arts is dying, that the schools themselves are going away. And in fact, in this COVID-19 context, we're probably going to see that accelerated a great deal. So rather than losing 10 to 20 schools per year, we could end up losing 300, 400, 500 in the next 2 to 3 years, because there were a lot that were sort of on their way out, and this is accelerating the process. And so when it comes to liberal arts, I think that it's important if we can agree that it's important to have some understanding of a lot of different things, not just be an expert in one single thing. I think that that's really on display here during this pandemic. Let me tell you what I mean. Let's get real for a second. When should each state open up? It's a math question. It should be a math question. Unfortunately, it's not. It's a rhetoric question. It's a political question. But really what it should be is math. I was watching an interview with Dr. Katz here, who I highly recommend you check him out. Again, Google his name. I'm sure you'll find all sorts of things about what he's done during this crisis. But he makes it pretty clear, a very reasoned approach that says we need to look at what it's going to do to health centers, what it's going to do to our infrastructure. And then we can sort of ebb and flow as the numbers make sense to ebb and flow. We can look at where in society certain things need to open up in terms of specific job areas, specific elements of finance, specific elements that will help the economy. And at the same time, we can watch to see how that's pushing the boundaries or the expanding the boundaries of what we can handle in terms of infrastructure. Then if we scale back a little bit, we do, and then we get it under our belt and we can go back out a little bit more and back, and almost like an accordion. But that's certainly not what's happening. What's happening is we're saying, well, what do I think should happen? What's my gut? What's my feeling? That's a shame, isn't it? That we don't have more math across the curriculum. At the same time, some of us are not learning from history. Just recently, as a person who is in Denver, we've seen a lot of things on the news here about what happened back in 1918 when Denver opened back up too soon. And the results of that were deadly. But again, history is not something that a lot of people have a lot of awareness of, because in liberal arts education, first of all, there's not a lot of history classes taken, except for the required classes. And as a result, history is not something that's part of most people's understanding of the world. I think it's fair to say that we need science right now as much as we ever have to really know what is helpful, what is not helpful. And yet most of our culture is science illiterate. We don't understand basics about science and genetics and DNA and physics and chemistry and biology and all those sorts of things that really would be helpful at a time like this, so we could have intelligent conversations about how to move forward, when to move forward. When we start talking about testing, you know, it ranges in terms of how many tests we should be administering per day in order to open up, from 500,000 to some estimates are 35 million. I think we might be able to have a little bit stronger conversation if we had a better handle on math and a better handle on science. You can certainly see it in political science, whether or not quarantining is actually an infringement upon civil liberties and the greater good, the public good and saving lives versus my ability to go to a bowling alley or to go to a restaurant. Again, we don't have people who are really well versed in political science. We have people who are indoctrinated in very specific beliefs that they surround themselves with over and over again, so they're never really challenged on what that means elsewhere. My home discipline of communication or rhetoric, I think it's disturbing how many people on the right and how many people on the left have harmed society by spreading misinformation and disinformation and really hurting our understanding of what's okay and what's not okay. You can see it on display anytime you turn on one of the extreme stations. You'll be confronted with it immediately. And it's really harming us. Those filter bubbles, again, that we surround ourselves with of just, I'm only going to listen to what I already believe, are really hurting our society, our culture, our ability to thrive, our ability to live, our economy, everything right now. And at the end of the day, if you want to look at sort of the kind of diamond of liberal arts education for a long time, that thing that has been the most arrows slung at it, and at the same time been really shown as something that liberal arts educators often say is important, philosophy. How much is a life worth? It's a hard question. It's a question that I don't think a lot of people want to answer, although some people have, and audience members sometimes don't like the answer that they give. But when you look at a liberal arts education, at all of those different facets of what it is that we should probably bring to bear right now in this time of COVID-19, we're not doing it. As a result of that, I think we can start to explain why liberal arts may be dying. There are pundits out there who are saying that the universities aren't preparing people for what they need to be prepared for. In fact, I've recommended this before. The Case Against Education by Dr. Brian Kaplan is really a powerful, powerful argument that suggests that people are not learning what they say they're learning. We're not teaching critical thinking. We're not teaching problem solving. We're not teaching all of that wealth of information. Instead, we're trying to teach one subject at a time that people end up forgetting most of, and they don't connect those things together. When you start to look at what employers are saying about what we're not teaching, the list is long. We're not teaching communication very effectively. We're not teaching statistics. We're not teaching about money or the management of money or change or risk taking or problem finding. We're not teaching these things. And yet, as you start to see the books that have come out talking about the power of that connection, the power of really looking at associative thinking in the innovator's DNA that says, in order to solve problems innovatively, you've got to understand a lot of other contexts. You've got to understand how problems are solved in other places and then bring that to bear in your context. I think about Peter Senge and what he said in the fifth discipline, that the systems approach really requires looking at all parts of the quilt, not just looking at that one patch. And that if you're going to do that, it's going to be far more powerful, far more effective than if you only focus on the one patch. I think Epstein made an outstanding argument against the concept of specialization, that we need to have far, far, far more generalists in our society in order to help us all be better at life. And then I just think about learning itself. Look at how people learn or make it stick. It talks about the need for connecting ideas to other ideas from other places. And yet again, we don't do that. Now, I have my own theory as to why that happens. As I've said before, I've talked for 20 plus years to professors all around the globe, and I have heard reactions to questions about these things, about teaching writing across the curriculum, math across the curriculum, reading across the curriculum, and why people don't want to do that. I've sat in committees where they lamented the idea that they had to start teaching things that they weren't well versed in themselves, weren't really passionate about at all. I've heard professors say, I don't have time. to teach writing in my class. I don't have time to teach reading in my class. I have to teach this one very specific thing. Now, I would argue that if you watched last week's quarantine note, they probably do have time, but they have bloated the curriculum so much that maybe they don't do it. I've heard teachers say that they teach one thing, not the other thing, which is kind of the same thing as the first, that I'm not going to be responsible for teaching teams or groups. I'll put them in teams, even though no one's ever taught a student how to be in one. I'll create leaders, even though no one has taught these students how to be a leader. I'll create a system where I will evaluate them, even though they don't understand what evaluation in a group should be like. But that's not my responsibility to teach it. And then there's the old fallback. I'm not really teaching the subject matter anyway, so the fact that they forget most of that subject matter is fine, because I'm really teaching them how to think. But again, the anecdotal evidence and the research that is brought out in Kaplan's book and many other places, and he has meta-study after meta-study that shows students are not learning how to critically think. Going to college is not producing better critical thinkers than people who don't go to college. And I think that that's a problem. But I do think that there's a fix, or at least there are some fixes. And one of those fixes stems from something called curriculum integration. The idea that you are bringing to bear multiple themes or concepts or topics as affected and impacted by learning in different contexts, different modalities, and at the same time, different subjects. Those things become important. I've actually been involved in one way that this can be done. Through gamification, or some would say simulation, what I like to call an alternate reality learning experience. Starting back in 1997, I started to create a course that was based on the murder, that's me, yes, on a murder that takes place on a college campus. And so brought to that murder then is a trial. So some of the students were in science classes and they acted as forensic pathologists. Some that were in media took pictures like you see here. Students became the actual jury. Students were the attorneys. Students were the defense, the prosecution, just about everything except the real sitting bench judge that we got to play the judge. Everybody else was a student, and they brought to bear their communication skills for editorials, their criminal justice skills as they took care of the students, whatever it might be. After that, and I ran that course with some other professors and stuff a number of times. Then we tried to take it on the road, as you will. We put it into an online format. We unleashed, believe it or not, a contagion on the world. We said to students in Australia, as well as in the United States, in both K-12 context and in higher ed, can you figure out what the contagion is? How to stop it? Should we quarantine? Should we not quarantine? So we had political science students acting as governments. We had science students acting as chemists and biologists trying to figure out what this thing was. We had communication students writing editorials and op-eds saying, we should open up our borders. We should not open up our borders. We should work with other countries. We should not work with other countries. It's fascinating how much of that actually has, come to bear during this experience now. But we really integrated the curriculum around that theme. And then I just kept doing it. When I was at St. Leo, we created a presidency run to see if our campus could actually host a mock debate or a real debate based on a number of factors. We created another trial, including a third trial that actually was the retrying of Lee Harvey Oswald based on some new evidence that we had planted in the mix. We made it on NPR and into some commercial spaces. We also had some papers come out of it. In fact, I have actually now done this a number of times, 12 times, with different themes, different concepts, different contexts to try to help with the concept of curriculum integration. Curriculum integration is something we should all be striving for. It's something that you should contact your peers about, your friends about, your colleagues about. I would actually argue if you say, I don't know how to integrate my curriculum with someone from another subject, you might not be a master teacher yet. Maybe you're just not there. But for those master teachers and master professors that are out there, this is important. To take a single concept, a single theme, a single idea, and allow multiple types of content to come into that, to be assessed against that, to be instructed with that. That's powerful. It's powerful for students in terms of learning. It's powerful for students in terms of the ability to now critically think and problem solve and innovate based on things that they have brought to bear from other contexts. So I highly recommend, take a look at curriculum integration. Use it at your school, use it in your class, contact your fellow peers, make it happen. And we will have better learners as we do. Good luck and good learning.